We return to the KH letters by C.W. Leadbeater. This is the second letter of the Master. I have placed before you, for your meditation, the child Buddha, Siddhartha, at about the age 7. We read in these works that the elemental who comes to form this body stays with the child until about the age of 7. So it's the family of Karanjit Sian who has given this upon our altar. And if you are able to see it from where you are, I think I'll hold it up. So this is the child, Siddhartha, and the matrix of this body and this stance is extremely powerful. He holds his finger of authority high, the other to the left. So we can meditate upon this child throughout the weekly gatherings so that we can ask that our own electronic presence mirror this manifestation of Siddhartha. It's very powerful and very happy. Now from the group that went to the Philippines and to Hong Kong, this is a statue of Bodhidharma. His eyes perpetually opened, so he cannot forget God or do his prayers. So he will be facing me. So you have both of us delivering the fierceness and the love of the word. So this is the second letter, and it is expounded upon at great length. The second letter from the Master KH. Since your intuition led you in the right direction and made you understand that it was my desire you should go to Adyar immediately, I may say more. The sooner you go, the better. Do not lose one day more than you can help. Sail on the 5th if possible. Join Apasika at Alexandria. Let no one know you are going, and may the blessing of our Lord and my poor blessing shield you from every evil in your new life. Greeting to you, my new chela, KH. Show my notes to no one. Before I comment on the second letter, let me deal first with the sacrifices which Mr. Leadbeater made when he decided to follow his master. For there were sacrifices, and knowing about them may clear the vision of some from whom also sacrifices will be demanded when their time comes to follow their master. The first sacrifice was a complete break with his family. To leave suddenly all near relations, especially those who had helped him in his career, without a particle of reason, meant, of course, never to hope to be received back into their circle again. We can imagine the utter astonishment of the dignified cleric, his uncle, at his nephew's declaration that in 3 days' time he was severing his connection with the parish, leaving it seriously handicapped in its regular routine. And this for no more evident reason than that of a man whose mind had become unhinged through spiritualism, theosophy, and similar unholy allurements. Nephew and uncle and aunt never met again, even after Mr. Leadbeater returned to England 5 years later. He did once meet another aunt who was very fond of him, and once a cousin or two. But for all practical purposes, though he was of an old family and in the county set, he was outside their pale as a renegade and wastrel who had thrown away his opportunities. I would like to tell you the story of my situation, which is close to this one. So the having to leave part takes us a little further along to the place where I was summoned by El Morya, as you know, to go to Washington, D.C. to be trained by him and Mark Prophet. And so I had gone to the July conference in Washington, D.C. at the famous Dodge House, and I realized that I was needed and that the Brotherhood was sending for me to come, and they were in a great hurry. There was a great hurry to this event, just as there is a great hurry that days have a great meaning to the Master in this book. So I decided that the best thing to do was to complete my college degree. So I took my 12 credits over the summer, accelerated that, and I arrived sometime at the end of August in Washington, D.C. to immediately begin my training as a messenger. I realized from reading this book that had I not said yes at that moment, if I had not received El Morya, who came to me in the park in Boston and in my apartment and told me, I have need of a feminine messenger, go to Washington and I will train you. To me, it was obvious, I had been searching for the Masters for years and years, since I was 18, that of course I was going, and there was no question about it. So, having looked for the Masters for 5 years, high and low, everywhere I went, and talking to anybody I could ever meet anywhere, where I happened to be, have you ever heard of Saint Germain? Do you know who Saint Germain is? And so forth. To come upon people who would challenge the Masters was just truly impossible for me to understand. I just could not grasp it. And so, unbeknownst to me, which was told to me much later, was that the Ascended Master were so fed up with prima donnas and with women who thought, well, they were so important that they really didn't have to do what the Master said, that they had decided that I was the last one that they were going to give this training to. And so, of course, I didn't know that, and I was very happy to be trained under Mark. And I remember what Mark told me later, what El Morya had told Mark. And El Morya had told Mark that Mark was to discipline and train me like one of his stallions, but not to break me. Those were the instructions. So, here's the stallion. So when we come to this and we see that Leadbeater just picks up and walks out. The other part of the story is that I was working, I was not only going to school, but I was working for the Christian Science Publishing Society, and I used to be in the newsroom for the Christian Science Monitor, and I had a job there that I had to get up at 4 in the morning and get to the Christian Science Publishing House and bring the articles that the journalists were going to be writing for the day. And it was on that particular occasion, which I've mentioned in the book we're writing, that it was very early in the morning, between 4 and 5, because, of course, all the news stories would have to break, and the journalists needed their materials. So it was a long walk from my dorm at Boston University to the publishing house, but there was no traffic, there was nothing. It was a wonderful time to be outside and to be walking. And that was the occasion when I was walking along the street, and all of a sudden I was very high up in the upper atmosphere, looking down at my body, walking to the Christian Science Monitor, where I was going to deliver mail. And at that point, I looked down at myself, saw myself as mortal, and saw that I was one in my I Am presence looking down upon me. And again, I recognized that this was an opportunity. If I did not take this opportunity, it would never come to me again. So God allowed me to see my immortality, to hover over it, to realize what part of me was walking, which is the lesser part of me, and that the greater part of me was already in heaven. And that I had to stick with that body and that soul until all of my being would become one integrated personality in God. So that was followed by El Moria saying, go to Washington, I have to train you. And I walked out of the Christian Science movement that I had served since I was 9 years old, starting in Red Bank, New Jersey. And all of my life was dedicated to this teaching, this path. And I moved to Boston, went to Boston University. I headed the young people's ministerial group where they had the opportunity to gain their ministerial degrees at Boston University. And I headed that particular club that they had. So I was really known all over the Christian Science movement and organization. And overnight, I packed my bags, I left, and I went to Washington, D.C. Mark Prophet driving me there, I think with a U-Haul, with all of my worldly belongings. I walked out of that apartment, and it was like I had concluded one lifetime, and I was starting another. The break was so intense, I cannot even tell you. The intensity of that break, where I cut off that life, never talked to another soul again who belonged to that church, although I had worked beside them in many different offices and in the church headquarters in all those years. I simply left. And that is the way the Master wanted, was tell no one, go, this is your next assignment, and you have to go now. So I'm telling you this story so you realize that this experience is really not 100 years old. This is the experience that comes to everyone who wants to be an adept. And you should ponder in your heart if you want to be an adept, because every one of you in this room can become an adept. It is your choice. It is your free will. But don't baby yourself. Don't coddle yourself. The masters are not going to coddle you, and you have to take the initiative. And so those were the storms that I weathered, and if you decide to be an adept, be ready for it and be joyous. And don't mind the pain, because you get past it. You really get past it and you enter the joy. So here is this wonderful person, Leadbeater, who leaves his whole thing in England and decides to just go on his way. So his first sacrifice, as I was reading, was a complete break with his family. To leave suddenly all near relations, especially those who had helped him in his career, without a particle of reason, meant, of course, never to hope to be received back in the circle again. The second sacrifice was the renunciation of all his worldly prospects. It is true that he was only a curate, but he had certain unusual abilities to get people together and make them work as a united band for a noble cause. His ability as an organizer, as choir master, Sunday school director, and creator of boys and girls clubs, his love of athletics, he was good at tennis, a fine swimmer, and could do something at cricket too. Above all, the capacity he had to inspire boys and girls to live pure, speak true, right wrong, follow the king. All these went to make him not merely a priest, but just that type of priest whom the Church of England wanted. I give as an appendix an account of this aspect of Mr. Leadbeater by the late James W. Matley, who was a boy in Bramshott Parish, and later into his dying day a devoted friend and admirer of his elder brother. Mr. Leadbeater furthermore had a deep devotion to the Church of England. He was an enthusiast of the beauty and history of its cathedrals, its music and hymns. Even to the last he knew many hymns and tunes by heart. As a high church Tory, the Church of England was to him the very root of all that was great in the English cultural heritage. And for him, in the greatness of that church, lay the greatness of England, though he had very little leaning to theology. It is to such a type of young priest of the Church of England that his pathway lies to rectories or vicarages, deanships and canonries, and so to a bishopric. It was this same ability of gathering round him a band of young and old to work devotedly for a common cause, which he carried into his activities as a theosophist, in Ceylon as an organizer of Buddhist vernacular and English schools, Sunday schools, and Wesak carol parties. In England and the United States, in lotus circles and round tables, at Adyar, gathering round him a band of secretaries, writers of letters and articles, and budding theosophical lecturers, and authors watchful that each should be led to find his niche in the common edifice of work. In Australia, welding young and old into one solid phalanx to work together unselfishly and hard in the various causes dear to the masters. Lastly, there was one sacrifice which Mr. Leadbeater made, to which he rarely alluded. Once, when speaking to me of his coming out to India, he mentioned the incident, but quite casually, as if it were all a part of the day's work. It was the sacrifice of all of a young man's plans of happiness in marriage to the girl of his dreams, for he was deeply in love with a girl whom he had known many years, the sister of his schoolboy chum. He had never let her know that he loved her, first because he was quite shy and thought himself quite unworthy of her, and secondly, he did not wish to stand in her way in preferring someone else to him, for as he said to me, a fellow can't ask a girl to marry him on £120 a year, which was his salary as a curate. But he had strong hopes of preferment and looked forward to the time soon when he could offer marriage to her. As mentioned already, his uncle had a good deal of influence. The Reverend Mr. Capes College, Queens, had several livings in its gift. Bramshot Parish itself was such a living. Mr. Leadbeater's period as a curate, with the abilities which he showed in the management of a parish, and with good looks on his side, was the first step in a fairly sure career. When, however, Mr. Leadbeater read the master's letter, even love itself was renounced instantly, with all others to follow him. In after years he used to remark with a little pride that he had lived up to the motto of his family coat of arms, toujours prêt, always ready. Perhaps it was the lesson he learnt from this sacrifice which made him often say, especially when speaking to young people, for a young man it is often the case of occultism or marriage. He had not the slightest aversion to marriage as a sacred and honorable institution. There are chelas of the masters who are not celibates but married men and women. But it does sometimes happen to a young man or a young woman who is on the fringe of chelaship, or even at a later stage, that his or her character does not know how to play rightly the dual roles, both as a server of the master and as husband or wife or as father or mother. The cares and obligations of married life become too absorbing sometimes, and the bright hopes of joy and sacrifice for the cause of humanity fade away in the distance, and the aspirant grows to be a much married man or woman. Once we have made our sacrifice and we look back on our pain, it seems almost as nothing in the joy of the new life and light found thereby. But before and at the moment of sacrifice, it is the fact, as says Light on the Path. Before the soul can stand in the presence of the masters, its feet must be washed in the blood of the heart. There was a certain day for me in November 1889, when I was 13, when my feet were washed in the blood of the heart. That day the master received me as his chela. I have described what happened in the chapter, The Master, in my Little Christ and Buddha. Since your intuition led you. These opening words of the second letter show us how difficult is the path to the master. Had Mr. Leadbeater weighed carefully the pros and cons of the situation merely with his mind, his decision would have been delayed. Undoubtedly, he would sooner or later have become a chela, but he would have lost the unique opportunity presented to him by the crisis in the Theosophical Society. HPB was leaving the next morning. He had said goodbye to her, and it was unlikely that he would meet her again for many years. But he acted in the light of that mysterious faculty dormant in us all, called intuition. The term used to describe it in theosophical studies is buddhi, but its meaning is different from that given to it usually in Sanskrit. It is a characteristic of the intuition that it acts from the future. We need to remember that, because we are all futurists. We must act from the future because the present is already gone. It is a characteristic of the intuition that it acts from the future and not from the past or the present. It is excellently described by the phrase used for it by Lawrence of Arabia. The unperceived foreknown. The unperceived foreknown. How many of you here feel that you know something about your future and you feel it very strongly? See that? I told you, you're all futurists. The unperceived foreknown. It was not possible for the master to suggest that Mr. Leadbeater's presence was urgently needed at Adyar. Mr. Leadbeater might have decided to go to Adyar in a month's time, or in 2 or 3 months, after all his affairs had been properly put in order. But his intuition grasped the master's thought. When we're listening to the dictations of the ascended masters and we catch a phrase that stays with us, we need to grasp that thought and write it down, because it'll come back to us again and again, and it will guide us. So he decided to drop everything and leave at once. Very noteworthy is the emphasis which the Master K.H. has laid on intuition as a very necessary requisite in one's character if one is to unravel the mysteries of the path of occultism. In a letter to Miss Arundel written in 1884 occur these phrases: "The continual performance of duty under the guidance of a well-developed intuition. From their ignorant and malevolent intolerance, you appeal to us because your intuition tells you that they will not accord you justice." 2 years later, the master wrote to Leadbeater, "Believe in your better intuitions." Somewhat earlier, in writing to Colonel Olcott, the master said, "Intuitive as you naturally are, chelaship is yet almost a complete puzzle for you." And the whole problem was stated earlier by the master in the following: "It was never the intention of the occultists really to conceal what they had been writing from the earnest, determined students, but rather to lock up their information for safety's sake in a secure safe box, the key to which is intuition." And lastly, on this subject of the intuition is an action of the master to test the intuition of a would-be chela. In 1883, the master was in India and visited Colonel Olcott twice at Lahore, not in astral form, but in his physical body. On the first occasion, Colonel Olcott was sleeping in a tent. It was divided by a curtain, and on the other side was a certain W.T. Brown of Glasgow, who had arrived in India that year. After waking Colonel Olcott, the master left with him a letter in which are these words: "I go now to young Mr. Brown to try his intuition." Standing by Mr. Brown's side, the master placed a letter in his hand. The master's touch awoke Mr. Brown, but so great was his nervousness that it paralyzed him, and he refused to turn his face to the master. Always ready. Later, Mr. Brown received a long letter from the master of kindly advice and encouragement, but frankly telling him that he was not ready. You are not ready, that is all. If you are earnest in your aspirations, if you have the least spark of intuition in you, if your education as a lawyer is complete enough to enable you to put facts in their proper sequence and to present your case as strongly as you in your inmost heart believe it to be, then you have material enough to appeal to any intellect capable of perceiving the continuous thread underneath the series of facts. But Mr. Brown finally failed to make good. Very quickly he lost interest in the society, and it is said that in the end he joined the Roman Catholic Church. What's interesting about the interpretation and the materials that are in these letters is that we get a real sense of the people who came through the Theosophical Society, the good, the bad, and so forth. So here he is, this guy goes off to the Roman Catholic Church and might be there for embodiments for all we know. So, why was the master anxious that Mr. Leadbeater should go to Adyar immediately? The answer to this lies in the master's words later, join Upasika at Alexandria. HPB was leaving for Liverpool the morning after Mr. Leadbeater received the second letter to sail to India. There were accompanying her Mr. Alfred J. Cooper Oakley and his wife, Mrs. Isabel Cooper Oakley. Neither of these were chelas. Nothing that Mr. Cooper Oakley did showed that he ever aspired to chelaship. Mrs. Cooper Oakley did, but became a chela several years later. But so far as HPB's health and affairs were concerned, neither of them were of much use. I never met Mr. Cooper Oakley, though I have heard something about him, but I knew Mrs. Cooper Oakley well. Mr. Cooper Oakley was a Cambridge man and so presumably scholarly, but he was introspective and given to fits of deep depression and gloom. Well, we can't get anywhere with deep depression and gloom, can we? Though he went to India with HPB and stayed at Adyar for some years as assistant to Colonel Olcott, he was tepid in his devotion to theosophy. He left Adyar to become the registrar of the University of Madras and was found one morning dead in bed due to an overdose of a narcotic. Such are the people who went through Adyar. There is nothing on record to show that he ever felt any personal attachment to HPB, yet these people hung around. His wife did. She was utterly devoted to HPB, but she was constantly worried by want of health and required much attention. When she reached India, she found that her health suffered more than she expected, and she was forced to return to England. In spite of various and continued handicaps to health, Mrs. Cooper Oakley toiled day after day to the end of her life to serve the Masters and the Theosophical Society. In her devotion to them and HPB, she was flawless, but neither she nor her husband could be called upon for strenuous service. There was, however, one valuable quality in Mr. Leadbeater. He was dependable. This HPB knew. Otherwise, she would not have written with her own hand at the bottom of an article of his in the Theosophist, August 1886, "A brave heart," nor called him, in the copy of her Voice of the Silence which she gave him, "my sincerely appreciated and beloved brother and friend." He reverenced HPB as the mouthpiece of the Masters, but also admired her for herself and was her loyal servant. Colonel Olcott was far away at Adyar. HPB started on her long journey to India with only the two Cooper Oakleys. It was the Master's great desire that HPB should have at her side a man who was a man. In addition to this, Adyar was in the greatest need of capable assistance to help Colonel Olcott in what appeared to be a critical and overwhelming situation. Damodar K. Mavalankar was there, selfless, pure, and heart, brain, and soul dedicated to the Master. But he felt crushed under his burden, and early in 1885 his Master acceded to his prayer to be released, and he was called to Tibet to be with his Master. Dr. Franz Hartmann was at Adyar, but he was not a chela, and he was hostile to Damodar. Though the two Masters, M and KH, had several Hindu chelas in India, very few could be released from their work to come to Adyar, nor had they just the capacity needed to help Colonel Olcott and HPB in that particular crisis. Perhaps the Master counted on one further value that Mr. Leadbeater had in the crisis, that a clergyman of the Church of England should come out to India with HPB when she was proclaimed as a trickster by the missionaries and openly attest, as he did, not only faith in the Masters and in her, but also his conviction of the greatness of Oriental religions. Mr. Leadbeater accepted Buddhism when the party came to Ceylon. All these things did have an effect on the mind of the public in Ceylon and India, and held many steady who were wavering. Sail on the 5th. It may seem strange to those who do not know what the adepts really are, that the Master, though living in Tibet, should know what are the steamship routes to India and the possibilities of travel. Mr. Leadbeater received the second letter during the early hours of the morning of November 1st, as I find an entry in his diary, back to Sinitz at 2 a.m. with latchkey. That same morning, HPB and the two Cooper Oakleys left for Liverpool to sail from there to Port Said, where they were to transfer to a steamer to Madras. Join Upasika at Alexandria, instructed the Master. If Mr. Leadbeater could not join her in Egypt, much that the Master had planned could not be achieved. Mr. Leadbeater now takes up the story. Madame Blavatsky left London later on in the same day for Liverpool, where she boarded the SS Clan Drummond. Meantime, I was bustling round to steamer offices trying to obtain a passage for myself. The P&O steamer, which was to leave on the 5th, had absolutely not a berth vacant in any class, so I was reluctantly compelled to seek elsewhere. By the month of October, all berths on vessels to India have been booked long ahead. It is the beginning of the rush from England of the cold season visitors to India. There were not so many steamship lines in India 57 years ago as now. The only way to carry out the instructions of the master was to go overland to Marseille and hope to get to Alexandria on some French steamer. Mr. Leadbeater found that this could be done provided he left London on the night of the 4th at latest. This was what he did, but we see from the brief entries in his diary what a task it was, for he had to uproot himself completely from his English life and home and burn his boats behind him. He had a fair library, and the most needed books had to be packed to be sent after him. He had a telescope, and this too had to be packed carefully and arranged to be shipped to Madras. How he managed to get his tropical outfit in time, I do not know, for London then did not have the dozens of colonial outfitters there are today. And then the following brief entries in the diary tell a vivid tale. 1st November, in London buying outfit. Down to Liphook by 4:10 train, up late with F and J. 2nd November, last Sunday at Bramshot, up till 3 a.m. with F and J. 3rd November, hard at work all day with final arrangements, firework display, up till 3 a.m. with F and J. 4th November, buying goods and settling accounts, to town by 8:16 a.m. train, left 9:05 p.m. from Charing Cross, Mohini, and Miss A saw me off, very stormy crossing the Channel. In his reminiscences, How Theosophy Came to Me, Mr. Leadbeater remarks, I hurried down to pack my goods and chattels and to make my final arrangements, and I may say that I did not go to bed until I had left England. I believe one of the final arrangements was to arrange for certain payments on behalf of young Jim Matley so that he could be entered as a cadet in the Mercantile Marine in one of the principal lines, for the boy's parents were not well off and were unable to help their younger son to realize his dreams of becoming a sailor. Reaching Paris at 6 a.m. on the 5th, Mr. Leadbeater left for Marseille at 11:15 the same morning and reached Marseille at 6 the next morning and went on board the French steamer for Alexandria. When, however, he reached Alexandria, HPB had left for Port Said. Though he was delayed 5 days by quarantine, he did join her after all at Port Said before her steamer for Madras arrived. Madame Blavatsky's last word to me in London had been, "See that you do not fail me." And now her greeting was, "Well, Leadbeater, so you have really come in spite of all difficulties." I replied that of course I had come, and then when I made a promise, I also made a point of keeping it. To which she answered only, "Good for you," and then plunged into an animated discussion. All discussions in which Madame Blavatsky took part were invariably animated, which had evidently been interrupted by my arrival. Mr. Leadbeater then narrates how suddenly HPB's plans were changed by order of her master. Instead of waiting at Port Said for the steamer for Madras, the whole party went to Cairo. During the railway journey from Ismailia to Cairo, HPB received a precipitated message from the master KH in which there was one sentence for Mr. Leadbeater. "Tell Leadbeater that I am satisfied with his zeal and devotion." Wouldn't you like to receive a note like that? After a few days' stay in Cairo, HPB sent Mr. Leadbeater back to Port Said as a kind of avant courier to make arrangements in advance for some special comforts for Madame Blavatsky. HPB and the Cooper Oakleys joined the boat at Suez. Next instruction, let no one know you are going. This prohibition naturally did not apply to 4 persons with whom Mr. Leadbeater was closely in touch: his hosts, Mr. and Mrs. Sinnott, and Miss F. Arundel, and Mr. Mohini Chatterjee, both chelas. It was at Miss Arundel's house at 77 Elgin Crescent that both HPB and Mohini Chatterjee were staying. There were, however, many theosophists round HPB, a few who were true theosophists, but others that only in name, who were attracted more by occult phenomena than by the ancient wisdom. There was also the Kingsford-Maitland group of theosophists who cared nothing for the Hindu-Buddhist tone in the teachings of the masters. We can well imagine the curiosity aroused among the theosophists had the news been circulated that letters from the master were again being received in London in spite of the so-called Kulam exposure. The members of the London Lodge knew Mr. Leadbeater. A member in clerical dress was a rarity among theosophists. If they knew he was going to Adyar, no doubt a farewell meeting would have been arranged, as among theosophists today. Wherein lay the harm should all know that he was going to India? We know from the letters of the two masters, M and KH, that their action in initiating the theosophical movement was challenged by those dark powers called Dugpas in Tibet, who are ever on the watch to hinder the progress of humanity. The true originators of the Madras attack on the society were not the Kulams or the Madras missionaries, but these dark powers who used them, of course unknown to themselves, as cat's paws and agents. In this struggle between the adepts and their enemies, these dark powers are ever trying to tempt, entrap, and lead astray everyone known to be a chela. Undoubtedly, Mr. Leadbeater would have to meet their attacks sooner or later, but the master in this time of strain and danger did not desire at that moment that additional complication. When the second letter was received, no one except Mr. Leadbeater himself and HPB knew that he had become a chela. Not even his friend, Mr. Sinnott. Had many known and talked of it, even thought currents and clouds regarding the matter would have been set in motion to draw the attention of the dark powers to Mr. Leadbeater and to the role he was going to play as a helper of HPB. They would try hard to upset the master's plan. It was quite possible that they could arrange for an accident or some contretemps so that Mr. Leadbeater should miss his train and steamer connections and so not join HPB in Egypt. It is a general rule in occultism, the less said the better when carrying out a plan. May the blessing of our Lord. In the first letter, the master invoked our Lord's, the Tathagata's memory. On accepting Mr. Leadbeater as a chela, the master now invokes the blessing of our Lord of the Tathagata. The adepts do not use words in a slipshod way, as is constantly our custom in our common speech. The word blessing today has lost its pristine significance, and in a phrase like "your father sends you his blessing," little more is understood than a wish of goodwill and affection. But there is something far more than that in a real blessing. A blessing is a power transferred by him who blesses to him who is blessed, an energy which is incorporated into the receiver's nature to purify and strengthen him. Every one of us has such a power which we can pass on to another. It is evident that the amount, quality, and intensity of that power depends upon the stage in spirituality and evolution of the giver of the blessing. More wonderful is the fact that the more blessings we give, the more the power to bless increases in us. For what we give to another with our soul, the only true blessing, is not ours. We are, as we give, the channel of a great giver. For every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. In this process of conveying from above, there are stages, just as there are steps when an electric current of tens of thousands of volts is stepped down to a voltage of 220 or 110 for house usage. The great Lord Gautama Buddha, the Tathagata, possessed of a spiritual greatness beyond our earthly conceptions, had, when on earth, a blessing to give, whose power for good we can but dimly understand. But after he entered nirvana, that blessing cannot come down to earth except through those who are linked to him on that plane. So we must strive to enter that plane where Gautama Buddha is or was 100 years ago. We know that he is with us in his dictations and so forth. These souls are his disciples who live and move and have their being in him. Being such a disciple of the Lord, the Master K.H. has the privilege of giving the blessing of the Lord, that is to say, of charging the recipient with the Lord's blessing. He uses this power as he says to Mr. Leadbeater, "May the blessing of our Lord shield you from every evil in your new life." The next heading is, "And my poor blessing." One might well ask why the Master should use this very depreciatory phrase about himself. Yet that very use leads us to a great fact of the occult hierarchy, which has a deep significance. Not once, but all the time consistently, the adepts show a wonderful reverence towards him who was the last Buddha of humanity, Gautama Buddha. For he was the first of our humanity to achieve, through his love and self-sacrifice for our sakes, the height of development as a Buddha of humanity. Please chant the Om with the concept of reaching Gautama Buddha through your Om. If you are determined to reach the Buddha with the Om, it's a nice experience when you go hiking, walking, when you're alone, communing with Gautama Buddha, and to continue to chant the Om, all the while also expanding the lungs and the breath capacity to again deliver the Om. In the arrangements for the guidance of humanity in what is termed the occult hierarchy, the three greatest adepts form a triangle of the forces of the solar logos. They are the Lord of the world, the Buddha, and the Mahachohan, each being an embodiment to the world of the power and the nature of the first logos, second logos, and the third logos, respectively. So they are the Lord of the world, the Buddha, and the Mahachohan. On each globe of the 7 rounds of our earth chain, such a triangle directs the operation of the evolutionary forces on that globe. During the period when the life waves manifest on a globe, there are 3 lords of the world, 7 Buddhas, and of the Mahachohans a number which has not been revealed. During the long past of humanity, in the first 3 rounds and up to the period of the 4th race and of the 4th round, the office of Buddha has been held by adepts who have come to the earth chain from other evolutionary systems more advanced than ours, like Venus. But it was the Lord Gautama Buddha who was the first of our humanity to achieve the level of Buddhahood. Buddhist books narrate his action of will and renunciation, and the adepts confirm the Buddhist legend as in the main correct in substance. I have narrated that legend in a tale for children. The resolve. Picture yourself as being in the heart of Siddhartha as he becomes Gautama Buddha, the Lord of the world. Long, long ago there lived on earth a noble and brave man by name Sumedha. In those days there moved among men a wonderful being, a Buddha. He was called the Buddha Dipankara. One day the Buddha and his saints were coming to a certain city. The people of the city were joyful at his coming, and everything was done to make the city beautiful. The roads were swept and sprinkled, the trees hung with flags, and everything was made to look brave. Sumedha joined in this work, for he too knew what a glorious person a Buddha is, and wanted to show his reverence. Sumedha had a part of the road to level and sweep and decorate, but when the Buddha came, his work was not all done, and there was one big puddle in the middle of the road that the Buddha would have to go through. Sumedha would not permit such a thing, and so he lay face down in the mud, so that the Buddha might walk over his body to the other side. And as he thus lay down, he said to himself, "May I someday be a Buddha like Buddha Dipankara. May I also someday save the world." The Buddha walked over his body and then stopped and looked at Sumedha on the ground. Then he looked far into the future with the vision of a Buddha and saw that ages thence Sumedha would have his aspirations fulfilled and would live on earth as a Buddha, the Buddha Gautama. So he spoke to Sumedha and to the others round him and said, "This Sumedha is a future Buddha. One day he will be a Buddha and will save the world." The nomination. After the resolve, many, many ages passed by. Many Buddhas came and spoke their message, each in his turn giving over to his successor the spiritual welfare of the world. But all these Buddhas were not of us. There was none then among us who could take that exalted office, and so the Buddhas came to us from far off Venus and the Devas. But the time was coming when men should do their own work unaided, when its Buddhas and Manus should be the flowers of this, our humanity. Who should be the first Buddha, the first great flower of our human tree? In those days, two only among the millions of men stood towering above the rest in might of grace and love, Sumedha and another. In later days, we know them as Gautama and Maitreya, Buddha and Christ. Great as they were then, yet neither was ready to qualify for the office of the Buddha to be of the fourth root race. If neither was ready for the office at the proper time, surely humanity would suffer. Think about how life suffers when we are not in sync in our timetables, when we don't keep the timetables that we know we must keep, or else we lose. And if we lose, millions may lose. Yet it seemed almost impossible to qualify in time. So much there was to do, so little time to do it in. Then, little flower, for love of you and me, and millions like us, the Lord Buddha made the determination that, cost what it might, he would force his evolution, so that when the time came for a Buddha to appear to comfort men's hearts, the world might not go unaided. Life after life he toiled, undertaking a superhuman task. So great was his renunciation, so stupendous his achievement, that even the greatest of adepts, little flower, speak in awe and love and reverence of the love he bore us, that made him sacrifice himself thus for our sakes. So of the two on the same level of advancement long ago, one Gautama took the nomination, while the other Maitreya came with him each step of the way as his chief helper. The consummation. 2,600 years ago, Sumedha moved among men as a Buddha of humanity. That birth of his was in India, and men called him for a while Prince Siddhartha of the Gautama clan. But when his work was consummated and he reached Buddhahood, he called himself Samana Gautama the Tathagata. For 80 years he lived among men, that last of many times. For 45 years he preached and taught, loving his fellow men more dearly than a mother loves her only child. To each he spoke as suited to his understanding, to priests and scholars in deep terms of philosophy, to Chatta the little boy in boyish verses for him to sing. When the time came for him, the Buddha, to pass away, he left that form never again to return in body born of woman. And so leaving, he gave into the hands of his successor Maitreya, Lord of compassion, Christ the anointed, your welfare and mine, little flower, and that of the other 60,000 millions who form our humanity. The great adept known as the Mahachohan once said, describing himself and his fellow adepts, that they were all the devoted followers of the Spirit incarnate, of absolute self-sacrifice, of philanthropy, divine kindness, as of all the highest virtues attainable on this earth of sorrow, the man of men, Gautama Buddha. And later one of the masters, speaking of their wisdom and love when compared to those of the Lord Buddha, said, "We feel as if we are dust beneath his feet." It is for this reason that the Master K.H., having given Mr. Leadbeater the blessing of our Lord, then gives him, quote, "my poor blessing," quote. Shield you from every evil. If you wish, I will pause if you have comments or questions. Okay, I'll continue. shield you from every evil. Mr. Leadbeater is no longer with us to attest in what manner the Master shielded him from 1884 when he entered the Master's work to 1934 when he was released from that work on the physical plane. During a close and intimate collaboration with him of 45 years, I never noticed a single moment when his utter trust in the Master wavered by even the tiniest flicker, nor when his enthusiasm for the Master's work flagged. During the 11 years of my life with him in England from 1889 to 1900, when he provided for me and for my education, life was not smooth. He had no means of his own and had to earn his living first as a tutor to Mr. Sinnett's son, then as a teacher giving English lessons to foreigners in London, and later as a journalist on the staff of the London office of the Pioneer newspaper of India. There was a period when his income was so low that he and I lived in a tiny room for which 7 shillings were paid for rent. It had just enough room for 2 beds and a table and a couple of chairs and a box or 2 and a washstand. His considerable collection of books was tied up in bundles and placed under the 2 beds. I had my classes to attend and he his lessons to give or his office to go to. My share was to look after our very modest housekeeping. I recall a day when the only money in hand was 1/2 penny, though a few shillings were expected in the evening. Fortunately, he had still some good clothes left, for it was de rigueur that at the meetings of Mr. Sinnett's lodge, the London lodge, of which Mr. Leadbeater was secretary, all should be in full evening dress. There were occasions when his dress suit and gold watch were pledged with a pawnbroker. Imagine yourself going through all of this because of your profound belief in the Masters. In the outer world, there were ups and downs for him, and particularly a trying time in 1906 when his greatest colleague, Annie Besant, seemed to break the bonds of a deep friendship between them. But his attitude was one of serenity, for the only thing that matters was that he should be true to the Master's work and not be swayed by the judgment which others formed of him, though he felt much the estrangement from his greatest friend. But he said then with perfect confidence, "It will be all right, for presently she will understand." Interestingly enough, Annie Besant did betray Theosophy to a certain extent. She reincarnated and became a student at Summit University in Malibu. She was a very angry person, and she told me that she hated God. Now, this is her present incarnation. She has been angry ever since and has spread unrealities, negatives, against the church, this is in the same way in which she was attacking 100 years ago. So it's very interesting that the way people are is often the way they will be for centuries, unless they find a guru who will change their course. And that's what we need to think about, how we can get stuck in anger. This is a very angry woman, very angry. And when she told me, she sat in that chapel and said that she hated God, I couldn't understand it. I could not understand it. How anybody can hate God unless they must be on the very dark side of life. But he said then with perfect confidence, it will be all right, for presently she will understand. As to the fact that even some of his oldest and most balanced friends, on whose sanity he thought he could rely, turned against him, he was content to remember St. Paul's saying, "Who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth." This thought is to a chela the lighthouse beacon of home when tossed in the stormy seas of karma. To my own master I stand or fall, he is my judge, not any other. Such a trust in the Master is only another aspect of a trust in himself. There was one occasion when his Master's shield came before him and prevented serious injury. It was a very stormy winter evening in London. He was returning home from a lesson, with head bent down and struggling to hold his umbrella against the wind and the rain. Suddenly he heard the Master's voice, "Jump back, quick!" He sprang back instantly, and he had scarcely done so when there crashed at his feet a large chimney pot dislodged by the wind or by a dugpa. When he returned home, he told me what had happened only a few minutes before. I know myself what is the Master's shield, and I must give my testimony to it, though it means the drawing aside of the curtain which hides from the world one's inner life. I do so in the trust that it may encourage others to pledge themselves again and again to be firm to the end. The Master has never lessened my karma nor prevented me from making blunders, but seeing that I was committed to his work and was trying to serve the cause of humanity in my little measure as he serves in his large measure, when I was in the depths, the light of his tenderness and understanding had shone before me, and when in the sunshine he had flashed before my imagination and idealism greater ideals still to pursue. There was an occasion in this life when the most horrible karma of all my lives, beyond the wildest dreams of my imagination, had to be endured. A block of karma which had to be got out of the way, but the violence of whose onrush would certainly have swept me off my feet to destruction. 31 years before it happened, he foresaw its coming and gave me a precious gift, a true remember me, a source of inspiration which was for many years a surprise to me because I had not then earned it, though I have ever had for him the wonder of a child, for the utter kindness and beauty, the wisdom and power of a father, to gaze on whom was fascination and joy. He foresaw the work I would do for him despite the defects of my character, and desired that I should slowly grow in the special resistance I needed in the trial to come. And 3 months before the karma commenced, when I lived in the sunshine, he showed me, with not a hint of the disaster which was to happen so soon, the picture of a future of eternal joy of which I never dreamed, after that karma should be done with. So through all the years of the terrible trial, when he could not make the anguish of my pain 1 whit the less, the vision he gave stood before me, teaching me never to lose hope, for lo, I am with you always, even unto the end. And to be utterly certain past all doubt, how sunshine and joy, not for my sake, but for that of others, would be mine once again. Thus has been his shield to me. Were Mr. Leadbeater with us at this moment, he would say to all as I am saying, trust in thy Master, work tirelessly for him, and he shall give thee thy heart's desire. Greeting to you, my new chela. The aspiration of lives was thus fulfilled, for Mr. Leadbeater had known the Master K.H. in many previous incarnations and tried to follow him, but it was only this life that his karma brought him to the gateway of the path to liberation, which is also the path of joy in service. The memory of our Lord, the Tathagata, flashed out in the ego, and the personality leapt into what seemed to the lower mind the dark of an utter unknown. The intuition shone at a great crisis, and into the space of 12 hours were condensed the experience and the work which were said to require, on the average, 7 years. So this, again, is the allusion to Leadbeater going through his initiation in one night. Show my notes to no one. They were shown to me with the Master's sanction years afterwards, but it was only in 1908 that with the Master's permission, the letter was published in the Theosophist of January of that year. When the letter was then published, Mr. Leadbeater purposely left out this postscript, show my notes to no one. And similarly, I left it out when in 1919 I reprinted the letter in Letters from the Masters of the Wisdom first series. Why? The explanation which I have to give is the most difficult part to write of this commentary on these letters of the Master K.H., for it deals with a deep disappointment which a great theosophist who loved his master gave to that master through intellectual pride and lack of intuition. Among the stalwarts of the Theosophical Society next to HPB and Colonel Olcott was A.P. Sinnett. A wonderful achievement was his when, through his occult world, he announced to the Western world the existence of the adepts and of their philosophy. Certainly years before HPB had sent forth her monumental Isis Unveiled, she and Colonel Olcott, with others, had in 1875 founded the Theosophical Society, and in 1878 a brilliant work was begun in founding the Theosophist. But it was Mr. Sinnett who, for the first time in his esoteric Buddhism, gave the modern world an outline of the wisdom of the masters, especially as to their action in the evolution of humanity. Out of the answers to multifarious questions, often on very disjointed topics, Mr. Sinnett grasped with his mind the general lines of what the masters had to say on man, the invisible worlds, life after death, and the progress of mankind as a whole through eons of time. With esoteric Buddhism was born another presentation of the wisdom which clear-thinking minds of the modern world could examine and grasp. Yet, Mr. Sinnett had a strange defect. This is the time to assess ourselves. Do we have a singular defect? Do we know that we have it? Are we working on it? Etc. All of us have some defects, some lameness to ourselves. Though he had a deep love for the Master K.H., whom he addressed as guardian, his will was deficient to change certain aspects of his character as the Master desired. To the last, he had also an ingrained prejudice as to the superiority of Western races and the inferiority of Eastern races. Though he was awed sometimes by the power which the adepts evidently possessed, he was never convinced that they, being Orientals, had really a better knowledge than he on all matters, especially as to the West. We have only to read the long correspondence between him and the masters to note how constantly he pressed forward his views against those of the masters as to how theosophy should be proved to Western minds. It was not merely in joke that HPB, in her copy of Isis, which he gave him, wrote, "To the boss," nor after naming her own master, never with the least sense of irreverence but strictly literal in her Americanism, the boss, she termed Mr. Sinnett sub-boss. It was this intellectual pride which led him to be unjust often, and even, as the master says, cruel to both HPB and Colonel Olcott. The American democratic and, to Mr. Sinnett, the lack of polish and of society manners of Colonel Olcott grated on him intensely, and also to him in most things HPB was constantly in the wrong. Little by little he grew so unreasonable in his demands on the masters, and so unwilling to accept that there were rigid rules in occultism that, do what the Master K.H. could, Mr. Sinnett began to erect an ever-growing barrier between himself and the guardian whom he loved in his heart of hearts. At last, when in 1884, after the Kulam attack began, and his attitude to HPB was one of constant blame for stupidities and blunders of which he held her guilty, the Master told him, "Well, she is virtually dead, and it is yourself, pardon me this one more truth, who have killed the rude but faithful agent, one moreover who was really devoted to you personally. Friend, beware of pride and egoism, two of the worst snares for the feet of him who aspires to climb the high paths of knowledge and spirituality. You have opened a joint of your armor for the Dugpas. Do not complain if they have found it and wounded you there." Mr. Sinnett received this letter in London on October 10, 1884, 3 weeks before Mr. Leadbeater received this. Earlier in July of that year, the Master wrote to Sinnett, "I am determined to make one more effort, the last I am permitted, to open your inner intuition. Unfortunately, however great your purely human intellect, your spiritual intuitions are dim and hazy, having been never developed. It must have been after October 10 and before October 31, the date of the first letter to Mr. Leadbeater, that with some more than usual injustice towards HPB, Mr. Sinnett closed, all unwittingly, and therein lies his tragedy, the door in the master's face. And so the master wrote, "The right is on her side. Your accusations are extremely unjust, and coming from you pain me the more. If after this distinct statement you still maintain the same attitude, I shall have to express my deep regret at this new failure of ours, and wish you with all my heart better success with more worthy teachers. She certainly lacks charity, but indeed you lack discrimination. Regretfully yours, K.H." But Mr. Sinnett still maintained the same attitude to the end. 1 year before he died, when I saw him, he was still full of his grievances and depreciatory of HPB, and especially of her contribution to theosophy. When I went to England as a boy, I lived in his house for 2 years. Though he was polite to me, we were mere acquaintances. He was, however, always cordial with Mr. Leadbeater. Yet I had much opportunity to observe Mr. Sinnett and his ways. For in 1894 I was admitted into the inner group of the London Lodge as a chela of the master, and was present at the intimate and informal gatherings of the group, which were held on most Sunday mornings in Mr. Sinnett's library for discussion. Mr. Sinnett, even in 1889, when I joined his household, never realized that he had broken his link with the master. Though he received no more letters, he was thoroughly convinced that the master still communicated with him through a lady, a clairvoyant, whom he used to put weekly into a trance whenever she stayed with his wife and himself, for this lady, who lived in Ireland, came to London only once or twice a year. When a few years later this lady could no longer act as the master's mouthpiece, so Mr. Sinnett firmly believed, he sought another and later another. And when I saw him last, the latest medium was a man. And Mr. Sinnett never doubted the genuineness of these communications received through these channels. Isn't it amazing how people dupe themselves in their pride and then carry this over into the very next life? Since I have seen many children being born at various places in and out of the community around the world, I have recognized various children as being notable people out of history, recent history. And I recall seeing such children behaving exactly as they behaved in their last life, taking all of this baggage with them into this world and never bending the knee. There was in Mr. Sinnett a strong belief, which it was the business of none of us to challenge, that if ever the master determined to communicate, he would do so with him first, and only through him to others. This is what Mr. Sinnett believes. It would have come distinctly as a shock to him that Mr. Leadbeater, so junior to him in all theosophical matters, had received letters, and not he, Mr. Sinnett. The master desired that Mr. Sinnett should not feel hurt, and hence the words, "Show my notes to no one." So long as Mr. Sinnett lived, neither Mr. Leadbeater nor I wanted him, should he read this second letter when published, to feel hurt at this ban from the master. The master knew this characteristic of Mr. Sinnett, his belief that he was the only true representative of the master's wishes. For in a long letter which Colonel Alcott received from the master on board ship when nearing Brindisi in 1881, giving him advice and instruction regarding a troublesome situation in London, the master adds the postscript. Prepare, however, to have the authenticity of the present denied in certain quarters. That the master was right, and what were the certain quarters, we see from letters written by Sinnett on October 12 and 23, 1888, to Mr. Leadbeater, who was then working in Ceylon. One queer thing, Alcott has got with him a letter apparently from the master K.H., received while he was on voyage home. After making rather a mystery of it at first, he ultimately showed it to me, and I do not feel at all sure of it. It reads to me very much en suite with the other letters in blue handwriting that came during the 1884 crisis, when Madame B. herself admitted to me afterwards that during that time the masters had stood aside and left everything to various chelas, including freedom to use the blue handwriting. Of course, this paragraph is most strictly private to yourself. I do not want to raise a fresh storm by impugning the authenticity of the letter, which moreover has no direct reference to me, though it reads as though in a certain sense written at me, again a circumstance which makes it suspicious under the circs, as I know in my own heart that my inner loyalty to the Master and his ideas, as far as I can interpret them, is as unchangeably perfect as ever, as sound as yours, and I can't say more. The letter is all just glorification of Madame B. Well, if he made me known that he wanted me to beg Madame B.'s pardon for having been ill-judged by her, I would go and apologize most humbly, but meanwhile I can only follow the inner light. Of course, Alcott, in his simple, guileless way, takes the letter as entirely genuine without a thought of questioning it, and he is not to be blamed for doing so. I have not thought it of the least use to tell Alcott that I do not believe in the authenticity of the letter. So I conclude this pathetic story of a splendid worker for theosophy who might have become a far greater server still had he had less pride of mind, as also less pride of race. Of his betrayal, unconscious again of the trust placed in him by express command by the Master never to publish certain personal and intimate letters of the Master and of his brother, the Master M., I say nothing here. For a man with a perpetual grievance warps his mind and is not fully responsible for the derelictions of duty which honor forbids. This concludes the second letter, and we are open for discussion on this or related matters or unrelated matters. It gives us a sense of co-measurement of our own history and what we have been through and how hard we have had to fight to get where we are, and how important it is to remember that so that we never slacken our determination to continually rise above whatever is the current burden that is set upon us. So I don't think this should be a one-way street, and you should be talking to me now.
Good evening, Mother. I wanted to share a very precious story about Kuthumi. When my son was 2 years old, he used to remember going to Kuthumi's house, and he used to call it a house. And he used to call him Tumi because he couldn't say Kuthumi. So he'd wake up in the morning and tell me that he went to Tumi's house. And of course I was very curious to find out, what did it look like and what did he do? And the only thing he would tell me is that he made a big, big pink flame. And this is what he would do every night.
That's very sweet.
It was very precious.
Very precious.
Thank you so much for Darshan.
You're welcome.
During one of the last Darshans, when you were reading from the Masters and the Path, you kept emphasizing work. And, it's again in Kuthumi's teachings, we've heard it from Jesus, work while you have the light. Well, I heard this voice in me say, yeah, work, is that all we're good for, And so I've been pondering this, why it was in me and where it's come from, and the different kinds of work, the workaholic, one who works to prove himself, the one who works from the heart, the one, the work of serving your brother and sister, the one who works in different ways, and trying to figure out when one balances karma, how that all comes into play. And many of us have worked, for many years on staff, and where does it meet? Like in many times while I served, I would lose my harmony, or I would be unkind, and we've seen that among the staff where maybe we're too harsh with one another because we're anxious to get the work done or a job at graphics out. But again and again I hear work and the faithfulness to the Master and the dedication to the work. Does that somehow weigh the foibles of our consciousness that outplay in unkindness in the little ways?
Does the work compensate?
Yeah, I mean, does our dedication in our heart, if it's in the right place, does it balance those sins that we make on a daily basis?
Everything that speaks of inharmony or unkindness or abruptness or, who's the most important person here and who's going to call the shots, whatever it may be, it's a karma-making situation. And this is what we all have to understand. We could be here a long, long time on this planet, or we can make our ascensions in a timely manner when God calls us. We have to bite the lip till it bleeds to prevent ourselves from saying an unkindness or putting out anger. How can you expect to make your ascension if you work hard, but at the same time you're discordant? Is that your psychology? Is it patterns of this life or previous lifetimes? Whatever is causing it, we should be on a mission, a personal mission. Every last one of us here and all who hear me, wherever this tape goes, we should be on a mission to balance karma and not make new karma. And we need to tell ourselves what are the most important things that cause us to make karma. I have seen people who might as well be walking around with a yo-yo because they carry this yo-yo and the string goes up and down and the yo-yo comes up and they're discordant. They're a human yo-yo. And for some reason, which I cannot fathom, they will not make the commitment to go through therapy so they can work through these patterns and therefore not find themselves doing something that they don't really want to be doing, but they haven't figured out how to stop doing this thing that they're doing, which means we need help. And that's why we have our therapists.
But it's easy to keep your harmony in the middle of a woods, and then when you're stressed
Not
to the max.
necessarily. You could be very unharmonious in the woods. I mean
true.
it. You can be inharmonious when you start hiking up the mountain, thinking about things and people that are annoying you. You cannot get away with your stuff. You can't get away with it. You have to process it. And if you don't, you're going to be the loser. You may make your ascension, but you will not make it in glory and in the ultimate victory that you deserve to have when you've served the masters for 20, 30, 40 years. By that time, you should say, I want to come home with A pluses on my report card, and I don't want to have to go to some etheric retreat and do all this therapy stuff in order to make my ascension. Can you see yourself walking into a retreat? Sorry, you didn't do your therapy, You're still angry, you still have this problem. You've worked for me all these years. You've heard the messenger say it all these years. And yet, why are you doing this? Why don't you resolve what's inside of you and enjoy the harmony, the true harmony of your being? So you can do it by knowledge and wisdom, by study. You can do it by absolute discipline, disciplining what comes out of your mouth for starts to lessen the karma you may be making. And then go with the emotional body, the emotional body, the etheric body, the mental body, until you can truly say, I am at peace in all my members. I am at peace, and I will not be moved, and I will not be moved to irritation and so forth. That's why when I first started this book, I went ahead because it lists the problems. Anger, irritability, fussiness, it goes on and on. It's got at least a dozen states of the human consciousness that have to be dealt with by us.
So the work is the work of the soul then?
The work is karma. We have karma and the glorious opportunity to balance that karma because we are serving a master, and the work we do for him reaches the whole world. That is why Saint Germain has told us we could make our ascension in this life. When you do work in the Montessori school, when you do it in your department, wherever it is, and that work is put out, whether it's a book or what it's the product of your department, And that helps the masters. The masters are grateful beings. They're profoundly grateful. They are so grateful when you give them a tool. And so that book goes around the world, or this thing or that thing, or the energizing process, all the things we're doing, it helps the master throughout the world. So he has given us his causal body, his being, his presence, so that we can balance karma fast. If we can balance karma fast, let's not make it again fast. Let's not repeat ourselves making the karma that we just balanced. I mean, that is just plain stupid. You're good one day, you're naughty the next. So the naughty day, you're paying off the karma, and so it's equal now. It's neutralized.
Thank you.
We can do it. I know we can do it. You just have to have self-discipline and determination and be the observer of your own mind. That's what Buddha teaches us. Observe your mind. What is it doing? Is it doing something for God, or what are you thinking about? Are you just all over the place, just kind of yin and thinking about anything that pops into your head? Or do you have a firm visualization, for instance, of Gautama Buddha before you that you continually go back to as you're serving and working? We need to figure out systems that are foolproof for us, that make us be able to say, this day I'm getting up, I'm going to have a wonderful day, and I'm not going to be moved. Today, I'm not going to make karma. It's like my mother stopped smoking cigarettes. She decided that she'd have carrot sticks in her pocket, and whenever she wanted a cigarette, she'd eat a carrot stick, and that's how she overcame smoking. So basically, that's the idea. Figure out something that you can do to stop yourself from making karma, then do it. And begin by not talking so much. It's the idle word. It's the idle conversation that gets you in trouble. I have confidence in everybody here that you can do it, but you've got to do it. You've got to do it. There's no other way.
Thank you.
Hello, Mother. Can you elaborate on the Dugpa, what that is, and have we another term for that?
Like evil spirits.
Something like that. Is it a personality? Is it an entity? Does it have a form, a figure?
You'd actually have to research in the theosophical literature itself to see where that term is developed. I haven't gone into it, but it is evil beings of a low vibration who move in to upset and turn over your plans and projects. And that's why we are silent with our plans and projects. People have always wondered why I don't tell the world that I'm writing a book or tell the world that I'm doing this or that. It complicates things endlessly for people's minds, to be honest.
So these things actually, I mean, this is not just theory.
No,
these
these are demons that work against the light bearers. So if you put like a helmet over your brain so they can't read it, and you know what you're going to be doing, and you know what your project is, and you take the shield. And the shield is the spoken word of our dynamic decrees, but it's also a certain mental tenacity where you don't specifically think of what you're going to do, so no one can read your mind. You know what you're going to do, and you seal it, to know, to dare, to do, and to be silent. That's when you really have the successful alchemies.
Thank you.
Hello, Mother. I would like to know a better understanding of how I can use the violet flame in combination with the therapy and my psychology. I don't understand that clearly yet.
The violet flame is a cosmic eraser. When we call forth the violet flame, and our hearts are pure, and our motive is pure, because we want to heal ourselves and heal the world, then the violet flame balances a certain amount of karma. When you use the violet flame connected with therapy, you're using the violet flame to transmute the cause-effect record and memory of those things that you now want to put in the flame. You've seen them for what they are, you've learned the lesson of it, you want to go on, and so you want to make sure that that record, whether it was this life or many lives before, you want to make sure that that is cleared and out of the way so that it doesn't become a trap for you all over again, going back to the things you just cleared.
That means that I have to identify first which is that problem of that record through my therapy, and then decree about it, calling the violet flame?
Not necessarily. You can just get up in the morning and say, I call for the transmutation of the cause, effect, record, and memory of all karma that I've ever made on planet Earth. And to that end, I give these decrees. And you give them 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You come to the sanctuary, you decree. All violet flame that you give then on that day will go to what you just called for. I call for the cause, effect, record, and memory of my misdeeds and manifestations to be consumed by the violet flame. And then you joyously give those decrees.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I would like to hear from longtime staff members who may wish to tell us what you have learned in being here for the long haul. And how have you changed, and how have you matured, and how far do you think you've come on the path of gaining your ascension in this life, things like that. Does anyone have any thoughts on these?
Hi. I was absent for Darshan number 1, and I heard it today. And there are a few thoughts that came to me while I was hearing it, and I wanted to thank you for Darshan, and thank you for being a part of the community so that I could be a part of it from the beginning when I first came and beyond.
And when did you first come? Tell everyone.
Well, it's 20 and a half years now. It doesn't seem like it, but... So what I was thinking while I was hearing Darshan 1 is that, you know, before I met the masters, before I heard of the teachings, you know, I didn't have much of a life. And in one sense, I feel like I was, you know, the living dead, because I didn't have purpose, and I really didn't have a conscious, you know, desire for God or anything spiritual. And I feel like the community and the masters and everything that we are, you know, gave me an opportunity for real life. And I'm grateful. And I wanted to tell one story. While I was working in the kitchen at Camelot, we had one of our Sundays where it was, you know, a long haul, and we were doing an Indian meal at the end of the service, and the master who was dictating was Himalaya. So while you were working in the kitchen, you could hear the entire service, including the dictation. And at that point, I'd been several years in the kitchen, and it was very hard work, and, you know, sometimes it was difficult to pass the test and hang in there. And I was, there were many, many people in the kitchen that day, and I was part of the chapati team. And we were making fresh chapatis from scratch. And I was the one who was rolling them out. You had to roll them out by hand. And so after a few hours of doing this, you know, my fingers were stiff and starting to hurt. And, you know, and I was a little bit grumpy or whatever. And and I said in my heart, you know, gosh, I've been here several years, you know, and, you know, I wonder why. You know, I've been here so long. You know, I guess it'd been 6 or 7 years, something like that. And, you know, I thought maybe I should be moving on to bigger and better things or whatever. And in that moment, the master's dictation, it was as if he answered me. And he said, you know, some people have have been in the mystery schools and have turned their back on them, and I said, oh no, I thought, oh no, gosh, I hope I'm not one of those. I said, and I took a deep breath and I started rolling out those chapatis faster than ever. And I said in my heart, I said, see, Master, I'm here. I'm doing this. If you want me in the kitchen, it's okay, But it was incredible. It was an instant response from the Master. And, it's like when those things happen, they don't happen often for me, but I guess occasionally the Master, thinks that I'm asleep or that, I've forgotten him or that he's real. And, he just pulls something out of the blue, and I go, okay, I understand. You're real. But thank you very much.
You're welcome.
When Juan was asking about the violet flame, and I thought I should give a witness about the violet flame because I've been doing it for a number of years. And when I first came into the community, I was right on Pamela's coattails, and I felt myself, as I learned about the light and the teachings, I felt myself to not have as much light as I had darkness. And so I prayed daily and hourly and everywhere I went, and I did the violet flame and I did the Estrellas, and I worked very hard on my psychology, and I wanted to witness that the violet flame works. I don't know how or when, but somewhere about, I guess it was about 10 years, I realized that the light was greater than the darkness in me. And so I realized that it was the victory of the light, and that by just being here and working and striving and giving the violet flame and doing my Estrellas and making my calls, that it was working. And it wasn't anything I did except for trusting and having faith and applying the teachings and hanging on to the coattails of the Masters and of you, Mother, that God has given me the victory. And so the path is still before me, and I'm still climbing, and still a lot of violet flame to do. And if you were recommending therapy, and I was thinking, yes, I could still use some therapy. And so I still do have a long way to go, but I just wanted to say that, I am the witness that violet flame works. It's changed me completely. So thank you.
Do you realize by sensing that balance that you now have more light than darkness in your being?
Yes.
And that means that you have the opportunity for the ascension if you keep on for the next so many years until your victory. And it's almost like being on a seesaw, is where we are. Like if you're on the seesaw at the bottom, you're at the very bottom of the karmic heap. Then when you're up on the seesaw, you're at the height of the light. We should never take for granted that we have enough to make our ascension, but when you feel that sense that you are now a being of greater light rather than greater darkness, it's a tremendous turnaround. I mean, this is a tremendous event in your life. Did you say it took you 10 years to do this?
Yeah, actually it was 10 years.
10 years of giving the violet flame and the Estrellas and what you already mentioned. So this is the success story that we all have to pull. This great success story that we can make it. And the interesting thing is, you think you're going to assess people and what person is really cut out for the path and what person is going to make it. You're always wrong. You're always wrong. And the people who think they're really self-important don't get too far. The people that continue and continue and continue and never cease, they're the ones you find in the heaven world ultimately. So I wish that victory for all here, and again, all of you are capable of it.
I also wanted to say about karma, because you had mentioned that. I had a lot of karma when I came right after some university before I joined staff. You told me that I had a mountain of karma that you couldn't even see around. And
It's true. That is true.
and I
I have another story to tell you about that, but it's not about yourself. This is a very interesting story, then. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that I feel that, when you told me that, my determination to balance that karma was so strong that by the grace of God, nothing has changed in the 20 years since then. I feel that I have balanced a tremendous amount of karma, and I've gone through a lot to do it. And so it is possible to balance your karma in this life, I'm sure I have more to come, but I feel like I've made a big, big dent.
May we all have big dents.
You actually told me that I did a couple years ago.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Jill.
Good evening. I've been here, it'll be 20 years in December, and there are a few specific incidents that I wanted to witness to. First of all, I wouldn't give up the 20 years that I've had here for anything. And I'm grateful that we're going through a re-energizing process, and I think it's time for the community. But I also think that for those of us who were here, there's something that was very special in the whole process of forming a community and working together and living a life that was totally different from what anyone else led. And I wouldn't give it up. If I had the choice to do it again, I would do it again exactly how I did it. Even living in my classroom and all the other things that we did, I think were really valuable. And there were many incidents the whole time I was here that were valuable, but there were two that I think have really helped me. And one was, at one time at Camelot, I got a very stern chastisement from you or from some master, I don't know who it was. And I had never had that experience before. I've never really had one since. I didn't work that closely with you. And it was so stern. It was like I could hardly even fathom what it meant, except that you told me to go do something right then. So I did, but it was very hard because I had to go do it with the children, and it was hard not to cry. It was hard to keep myself together. But in the process, I could feel the light filtering through. I could actually just feel it going through almost my four lower bodies. And at the end of it, I felt better, which I was kind of surprised at. And I thought about that, but I still felt like I was not in good graces, because every time I would see you in the school or some situation for months, I'd go to a tag and, I wouldn't be spoken to or looked at or smiled at or anything. And I thought, well, I just have to decree on this more. And it was a point of consciousness that my mother had always told me about. It was very subtle. It was a selfishness. And my mother always would just call me on the selfishness, and I just kept putting it aside. So it was something I really needed to hear. And so I kept working on this, and I'm still working on it today, but I'm at least noticing it now when it happens. But finally, it got to the point, it was months later, that I thought I knew I had come up higher, and I knew I had done better, and I knew it was no longer that I should be out of grace with the masters or out of grace with you. And I was sitting in a tag in the trailer behind the chapel at Camelot. It was an Easter conference. And I remember decreeing, and in my mind, I thought it so strongly. I said, Lanella, this is it. It's been long enough. So the tag was over. I walked out. You were walking down the path. We were passing each other, and you were speaking to someone else. And your head was away from me. And as soon as you got to me, you turned right to me and you said, hello, Janet. And then you went right back talking. And I went, boy, that was really fast. And I thought, well, he answered my call, because I could feel it inside of me. I knew it was time. But what I've learned from that is I can tell that vibration now every time it comes up, and I can catch myself with it, I hope, all the time. And I thought that was a very valuable teaching. And the other experience that I had was during the Mull court trial, which I thought was a very demanding and hard time, but also a very accelerated time. For the teachers, we were in the classroom all day, and then we were expected to go to services at night. And I started leading decrees with you shortly at that time, and I really enjoyed it. And I was also working on the First Holy Communion program, so I was staying up very late on Friday nights to get it ready for the Saturday class. But I remember at one point I enjoyed leading decrees with you so much, and it was definitely a challenge for me. And I got some kind of bronchitis or illness or something, and I was coughing and carrying on. And I led almost every other night. And I remember one night I went in and I was coughing and I was just carrying on. I said, Lanello, if you let me stay up here and lead, I will be happy. If you stop my cough, I will be happy to stay up here and lead. And so he did. He stopped my cough completely with absolutely, it was like a miracle. It was like I was almost completely healed. And it was an experience that I felt kind of like what Jewel was saying, that put me over the brink of a specific whatever karma it was that I didn't have to go back to. It was like moving forward during that cycle, and I felt it was a very valuable cycle. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank the community and everyone here.
Thank you, Jane.
Good evening, Mother. I wanted to share with the community probably one of the most profound experiences of my time on staff. I was new on staff. I didn't have much of a decree momentum. I coming right off the streets, kind of. I hadn't met anyone who was in the teachings. I hadn't done any decreeing. Came right to Summit University, and this was actually about a year after attending Summit University. And at the time I was living off campus, I wasn't making it into morning decrees. And due to the vulnerability and that, not having the decree momentum, I think, and also being new, not being able to get in for morning decrees, made me vulnerable to a situation where I was calling someone for a job interview, and it was someone nearby who was familiar with the church and apparently did not like us. And in the process of this phone call, a wallop of energy came at me, this hatred. And all of a sudden, I was caught up in this wave of this hatred. And after, concluding the call and walking around and seeing pictures of Mother on campus, I saw reflected back to me my own hatred, the hatred that I was caught up, my own dweller and whatever, wave of hatred I was caught up in. It presented itself whenever I would see a picture of Mother. It was just reflected back to me. I don't know, how I was to be, how people could have been around me. I felt like I was in such a terrible space in this anger and this hatred, and somehow made it through the day. And the end of the day, when I was in my room, and there, in the midst of this vibration, this hatred and this energy, came this other point of consciousness. And I don't know who or what, if it was my, El Moria, if it was my own mighty I Am Presence and Holy Christ Self, looking at the soul and sensing the preciousness of the soul and not wanting that soul to be lost. And something broke through to me at that point, through the anger, through this energy, and I knelt on my knees before a picture of Mother and El Moria, and I pleaded with them not to let go of my soul. And as I did that, that energy dispersed, and finally felt back to normal, and took the picture of Mother, put it under my pillow, and slept with it there many, many nights after that. And after a couple of months, I put this experience behind me because it was like being on the edge of a cliff. And the terror, of the thought of losing the soul was, it was too much to look at very much. So I didn't look at it and I didn't think about it. But I had the opportunity then, a couple of months later, to be going through a reception line for Summit University. I was working with Summit University at the time. And I had the chance then to shake Mother's hand. I was shaking her hand, and she was talking to me and kind of looking me up and down, and she kept holding on to my hand. And she didn't let go of my hand. I'm thinking to myself, she's not letting go of my hand. But it didn't occur to me at the time, that I didn't make the connection until later, that, it was God using Mother to say, I'm not going to let go of you. And so there are many, many lessons that I learned from this. The sense that the Guru is our mirror, because we often are blind to our substance, so we can't see it. It also, has made me realize how much we need to defend the soul and how fierce you need to be in that defense for your own soul and for the souls of people throughout the planetary body, and how much compassion we need to have for souls who may be lost if we don't care for them. So, thank you for not letting me go.
I'll never let you go.
Which, for those of you who do not know, I'm going to be leaving on Monday. I'm going to be going to Washington State. And I want to thank all of you for your love, for your service, and having the chance to say goodbye to so many of you. It just, it's been an opportunity to really appreciate your hearts and all that you are, all that you have to offer. And I just want to say I love you very much.
Thank you for being here.
Good evening, Mother. I'm truly grateful for all the experiences I had on the road, selling the books of the Masters and representing the Masters in that way. And I had a remarkable experience that I wanted to share. I've been wanting to share for a long time, that has to do with the presence of Lanello and immediate surrender. And this one really hit home for me. Accountability is another thing. I guess there's probably a lot of keywords I could use for this one lesson, but my last day on my last tour, Washington, D.C., and I'm really picking up. I'm about to drive home and finish my tour, but also it had been a very good, successful day, and I was about to visit my last account that day, and I'm looking for parking, and if anybody knows about D.C., it's not that easy to find parking, especially where it's okay to park. And now, I should tell you that, and this is a confession as well, that this was one tour where I hadn't accrued any parking tickets or speeding tickets at all. I had done the entire tour without one fault. And I was determined to maintain this perfect record because the last tours were a little bit more costly to me. So I was determined, and this was the last day, and I was going to maintain this record. And I found an area right in front, on the street, right in front of the store I had to visit. There were cars parked along this street. There were meters. I looked for signs. I couldn't see any. I got out, got all my stuff, went in, made the sale, came back out, and all the cars had disappeared, except mine, of course, with a big pink ticket on it. And I went flabbergasted to the windshield and tore the ticket off of it. And I looked around me to find out why it was I had this ticket, and there, sure enough, was a sign that showed that I had parked in an area that was no longer available to me because it was past 3:30. It was about 10 minutes past 3:30, which is rush hour. So I was a little bit taken aback. I got in the van, and I was wondering whether or not it was even just, whether or not I should pay for this ticket or not. I was actually my anger was building because I kept feeling the resentment and the injustice of it. So I pulled away from my parking area, and I'm just not going to pay this ticket. All of a sudden, this voice out of the blue tells me, stop right now and go and pay the ticket. And, just to back up a little bit, we as sales reps don't make a sale unless we have Lanello with us. We make the calls to Lanello, we listen to his tapes, we do everything it takes to get Lanello in there with us, because the opposition to visiting these buyers is incredible. And without Linnell's presence and the angels and Jesus' angels as well, it's very, very difficult to cut through. So we always have Linnella with us. So I think it was Linnella's voice. I'm almost positive of it. And it just kind of like popped me out of this sense of resentment. And I pulled over, and I decided to immediately obey this voice. And I went to an ATM machine, pulled out the cash, had the ticket with me. I was going to cross the street. There was a red light at the corner. There was a post office across the street that I was headed for to mail off the cash. I didn't have a checkbook, so I was just going to take my chances and do it that way. And I'm waiting there at the corner for the signal to change, and who comes along but this uniformed officer? And I had no way of knowing that he was the one who had assessed this ticket to me. But he comes up, and he starts to walk the street, and he looks at me, and he goes, "How you doing?" I go, "Oh, I'm doing fine, except for this ticket I got." I just happened to say this, and he stops halfway across the street, comes back, and says, "What was that?" And I said, "Well, I'm from out of town, and I was parked over here on the street. I didn't realize that I couldn't park there after 3:30, and I was like 10 minutes late, and it's kind of a bummer, but what the heck, I'm going to go pay the ticket." And he looks at me and he goes, "Well, let me see that." So I show it to him, and he opens up his ticket book, which he had just pulled out. I'm like, "This is the ticket cop." And, he leaps through the ticket book and finds my ticket and goes, "It's okay, I'll take care of it." And I'm just dumbfounded. I said, "Are you serious?" And he said, "Sure, and besides, you were so nice about it. And by the way, happy Thanksgiving," because it was Thanksgiving weekend. And I was just amazed. I just praised God right there on the spot. I said, "Thank you very much. You do your job very, very well." And I went back to my van with a lesson learned. Well, first of all, a lesson of accountability. If you get fined a ticket, you have to pay it, number one. Number two, if the voice speaks to you, go ahead and heed it, because it will pay off in the long run. So, and I just have such a litany of things I would love to be able to share with everyone here from my 14 years of service on staff, or almost 14 years coming up. And I believe I've made progress. What really shows me that I made progress is when I visit my relatives, my family, from time to time, and I see the progress they're making in their own spiritual lives. And I feel that it's very closely tied to the progress I'm making, that every step that I take, they're able to take another step themselves. My brother, my mother, my father, everyone. It's a real miracle to be witness to. And having cancer rising family is very important to me. So those are the ways I can see that I'm making progress. So I'm very, very grateful. I know El Moria is the one for me. He's the one who got me here, or I made him get me here. And without him, I wouldn't even, I don't know where I'd be. So I'm extremely grateful. And Mother, thank you for being there for me as well.
Good evening, Mother. I would also like to testify about the power of decrees and the vital flame. I actually joined staff 30 years ago this past October, although I have not been on staff all that time. And I remember at a time of my life when I was in college, and I was very depressed. I was full of anxiety. I had no sense of direction, what I wanted to do. And I was having a great deal of difficulty with father images in my own family. And when I finally got enough courage, I remember this like it was a photograph from long ago, I sat down and began to decree. And instantaneously, I felt the most incredible, amazing energy I've ever felt in my life. And I'm sure that other people have experienced things like this. But I just want to testify that if you've never experienced this, just have faith, that things are happening in your world. These decrees and the vital flame are absolutely incredible. They literally, in one day's time, turned my world around, my psychology, enough to be able to make me to graduate from college. I got good grades. I, wrapped things up fast, relatively speaking, whereas I had been a perpetual student. And I remember, this very interesting, the thing that George, our Ascended Master friend, George Lancaster, told us when he was on Earth, that he decreed for 10 years before he felt any actual action in his physical body. So
Not only that, but he got up at 3 a.m. to do it.
Right. That's right.
And I don't know if he was 4 hours or 5 hours, but he would get up at 3, and then after he decreed for 3 or 4 hours, then he'd go do the chores in the trailer park that he ran.
It's true. And so for a long time, I felt like, all the years in staff, I felt like I was on a plateau. And I had this difficulty with my self-image and almost feeling like a non-person. And actually, I wanted to avoid, that's how I had difficulties with certain of my jobs. One was teaching. I had certain difficulties there. And well, now I can understand why you and Mark called me up after I had delayed about a year or two. It said, you better come and join staff quickly because Amory says you're going to miss your deadline. You remember that conversation over the phone? Anyway,
I did remember it.
I guess I had they knew I would take a lot of time to get to working on myself. But I just want to say that I'm really grateful for the inner child work and for the personal therapy that I have been able to do with a certain person, which I started about 3 years ago. Now, it hasn't been very often, but when I did that, incredible changes began to happen in my world. And, you have to dig this stuff up. And I came to the point of realizing that I was willing to face the pain. I was willing to deal with it and face the pain.
That is the key. If you're afraid of pain, then you avoid therapy, and you don't get anywhere. And what's causing the pain, which is your anger, your this, your that, it will not go away if you're afraid of pain. How many people here really realize that the reason you could be avoiding therapy is you want to avoid pain? How painful can it get? I mean, you're not going to die. You're going to come out whole. Isn't that right, Walter?
Right.
I am astounded at the people who are afraid to deal with pain and therefore never get on with life because they won't process their pain.
Well, that's true. I can see it in my own case. So I'm testifying to that. But it has come in, and I'm trying to accelerate this now, these sessions, because I really feel a great sense of hope that I'm going to really, I've seen things happen, even in this last year. Blocks of anxiety and fear and other things, depression, have just, dissolved. And I just want to testify that starting 3 years ago, but in this past year, it flashed on me, I'm a son of God. I'm a proactive individual. Whereas a lot of my life I hadn't really felt. I hadn't the feeling. Maybe I was, but I didn't have the feeling that I was. The realization that I was. And I think this is accelerating this past month when I've been working on Jesus' book, getting all these pictures. It's been the most intense experience I've ever had, work experience, since joining staff. But it's really helped me with a sense of self-confidence, and I really have the feeling like I can do it, and I'm doing it. So I am ready to continue just keep going, keep on with this process. And I wanted to express my gratitude to you for being my spiritual mother, and to helping me. And I'm much more interested now than I used to be in taking your words of wisdom and your comments as being very, very important, because I've seen that they are. So there are other things that I'd like to say, but I think I've said what I came here to say tonight. Thank you.
God bless you, Walter.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mother, everyone. I've been on staff now for almost 9 years, be 9 years next month. I believe my motto for the path is definitely seek ye first the kingdom, and all else should be added unto you. And I believe in the power of the decrees and studying your pearls and trying to assimilate the calls and the admonishments the masters give us. When I first came to the teachings was in 1981, and it was just around the New Year's class time. And I was living with my two sisters' mother was visiting down in San Antonio, Texas, and we all grew up Roman Catholic, and we found out about study group there, and they were coming over and trying to give us lessons, teaching us how to decree. And we were also caught up in a psychic organization called Sananda, which is, as I understand, is false hierarchy of Jesus Christ. And we were caught up in the glamour of that, and wanting the auric readings and this and that. And so it's hard to get cut free from that. But when my sister got married around the New Year's time then, and she was going to go on her honeymoon to the New Year's class at Camelot, and I was all excited. I said, "Oh, I want to go." And my mother said, "That's not appropriate because it's their honeymoon." So, so I determined right then and there that I was going to do a novena, like the masters say, and just give a certain amount of decrees, different decrees for whatever, 6 weeks, whatever, 6 days, and just really try the masters. And I believe, I want to ask him about if that's a form of forcing the master, or like a minor example of forcing the master, a novena.
Anything you do for the master for a prolonged period with intensity,
Right.
he is compelled by cosmic law.
Right, because what happened was
to take you on.
After a 6-day period, or maybe a week, or 10 days, I had this experience at night. I was awakened in the middle of the night. I wasn't fully conscious, but I just felt this tremendous power of light. And all I remember the next morning when I woke up was the message: you have to get free from this man. He's leading you in the ways of death. So right then and there, when I woke up the next morning, I just knew that was my answer. Because I knew about the summit, and I just determined right then and there I was going to cut my ties with this group, because they're trying to train me to be a silver mind control instructor and this and that. And I had low self-esteem from having a weak father figure, so I thought I was getting all excited about that, But then as soon as I did this novena, it's just such a powerful experience in the middle of the night. So then I came to the Easter conference that year in '81, and Lord Lanto was my first dictation. And so then I went back, and one of the things he said in his dictation was to, he encouraged us to come to some university. So on the flight on the way home, I had my application all filled out except for the life history part. And so some of the other things that's happened to me has really increased my faith and in the Word is during Kuan Yin's Court, I went to Kuan Yin's Court in the fall of 1981, and during the quarter you gave a teaching on talismanic magic and the importance of it. And so I really wanted to own a gold cross, so I prayed to Kuan Yin. I didn't have the money, but I just prayed to her if there's some way I could have one that it would, I would get it. So towards the end of the quarter, one of my fellow classmates, an older lady, she approached me at lunchtime, and she said she had this gold cross for me, and it's actually a 14-karat gold cross with 3 little diamonds on it, and she showed it to me. She said, "I'm supposed to give this to you." So I thought it's so I graciously accepted and told her my experience that I'd prayed for one, and then also before I came on staff in 1987, I needed supply to pay off some debts to come on staff, and it was a summer conference, and I had this nice amethyst ring, and I don't really think I could have sold it out in the world anywhere, and so I just got the voice and the intuition to put up a sign at the bulletin board in the heart before, like 2 days before the end of the conference. So I put it up just hoping, I made the calls to Kuan Yin and prayed to her, and lo and behold, a fellow, just a keeper of the flame, saw it, and he actually ended up buying it, and he gave me the story that he went to the bookstore and he was looking for something, but it was too expensive in the bookstore. So when he saw that, he was all excited. So it worked out for both of us. So that really increased my faith once again, and in praying and in Kuan Yin's presence in my life. And I've always had a problem with hypoglycemia. All of us in my family have. And I believe that the macrobiotic diet is definitely the way to, if not cure it, to at least treat it on a daily basis, and along with the violet flame. And I'd like to express my gratitude to you, Mother, for all the admonishments and the counsel you've given me over the years. I remember a few years ago I was in the middle of a separation from my ex-wife, and I knew in my heart that I was supposed to be here, and you simply confirmed it, that I was not supposed to leave. And it turned out to be just right, because I don't plan to go anywhere. I'm in shipping right now, and actually when I came on, see, after Kuan Yin's quarter, I came on staff part-time for 6 months in shipping, and then I had to go out because I had many debts. And God gave me the opportunity, and Kuan Yin, I'm sure too, to pay out those debts. And what happened was I was able to take care of my father. And my mother allowed me to work off the debt I had with my parents by taking care of him. And at the same time, I was able to make my peace with my father to a great extent, and really to put myself in his shoes and to really forgive him. And it really made a difference as far as being able to go on with my life. So once again, I just want to thank you for everything you've done for me to help me get here.
Praise God.
Okay.
We're going to conclude now and invite you 4 speakers to be first on the list next time, because it is approaching 10:30, and tomorrow's a work day. So I think we internalized a lot from this reading tonight, and one of the things we have a sense of is all of the great souls of light who have attempted to bring forward a new movement, a new dispensation, and be the precursors of the new age. They're a very peculiar people, as it says in the Old Testament, that we are a peculiar people. And it is the people who embrace God and have that intuition and that superior vision of the future who really make the world go round. I'm very honored to know all of you. I'm very grateful for your presence here, and I want to thank you all personally for the wonderful service that you give. We have a lot to do and a joyous future that is, for me, only that golden sign of victory. So God bless you from the heart of Gautama Buddha and the great Central Sun. We'll see you again.